The laughter was sharp, cutting through the hum of jet engines like broken glass. A man struggled with an oversized car seat in the business cabin, his little girl clutching a worn notebook close to her chest. The passengers watched with barely concealed contempt, their designer sunglasses and press suits marking them as the kind of people who didn't tolerate disruptions. Nobody imagined that in just a few hours, when disaster struck 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, this same man would be the only thing standing between them and a fiery death. Nobody imagined he'd walk to that cockpit carrying the weight of 200 lives on shoulders they'd spent the entire flight trying to break. Her name was Amanda Sterling, and she'd perfected the art of looking down at people from her first-class throne. She sat in the premium cabin of Flight 782, her charcoal blazer tailored to knife-edge precision, her fingers dancing across a platinum tablet as she reviewed quarterly projections that would make most people's heads spin. She'd built her investment firm from the ground up, and she wore that achievement like armor. When James Holland walked through the cabin door, Amanda's eyes tracked him immediately. Mid-30s, she guessed, with the kind of broad frame that suggested he'd once been athletic, but now just looked tired. His jeans were faded at the knees, his jacket had seen better decades, and the little girl trailing behind him wore light-up sneakers that blinked pink and purple with every step. The girl couldn't have been more than 6. Her dark hair pulled into 2 messy braids, her face buried in a spiral notebook covered with childish sketches. James wrestled with a booster seat, trying to wedge it into the overhead compartment while juggling a backpack and keeping one eye on his daughter. Amanda leaned toward the woman beside her, a corporate attorney named Patricia, who wore her wealth in the form of a Cartier watch and blood-red lipstick that never smudged. "You've got to be kidding me," Amanda muttered, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby passengers. "A child in premium economy. What is this, a kindergarten field trip?" Patricia adjusted her reading glasses, her mouth curving into a smirk. "Probably saved up for months just to feel special for a day. Look at those clothes. I wouldn't donate those to charity." The little girl, Lily, settled into her seat with her notebook balanced on her lap. Her pencil moved in quick strokes, sketching something with the intense focus only children possess. Amanda caught a glimpse of the page. Crude drawings of military aircraft, the kind with angular wings and missile pods. "Oh, that's precious," Amanda said, loud enough that several heads turned. "Fighter jets." "What's next? Playing war games in the aisle?" James didn't look up. He just kept adjusting Lily's seatbelt, his movements methodical and patient. His face remained neutral, but Amanda noticed the brief tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers paused for just a fraction of a second on the buckle. A woman 2 rows back cleared her throat, her silk scarf probably worth more than James's entire outfit. Barbara was her name, a real estate developer who'd made millions flipping luxury properties in Manhattan. Her voice carried the authority of someone used to getting exactly what she wanted. "Excuse me," Barbara called out, her tone dripping with barely veiled irritation. "Some of us are trying to work here. This isn't a playground. Could you keep your daughter under control?" James finally looked up, his eyes meeting Barbara's with an unsettling steadiness. "She's drawing quietly," he said, his voice low and even. "She's not disturbing anyone." Barbara huffed, shaking her head as she returned to her laptop. "Well, she's disturbing me with her presence." There's a family section for a reason. The cabin rippled with quiet laughter and knowing glances. Across the aisle, a young tech entrepreneur named Ryan leaned back in his seat, his expensive sneakers propped on his carry-on bag. He wore a hoodie that probably cost more than a month's rent and had the kind of confidence that came from too much venture capital money too soon. "Hey, man," Ryan said, gesturing with his champagne flute. "No offense, but there's like a whole section of the plane meant for families. You know, where the screaming babies go. Maybe that's more your speed." His companion, another Silicon Valley type with gelled hair and a designer watch, laughed too loudly. Yeah, bro, seriously, we paid extra to avoid exactly this situation. James's hand rested on the armrest between him and Lily. He looked at Ryan for a long moment, his expression unreadable. She's my daughter, he said simply. She has every right to be here. Ryan blinked, momentarily thrown by the quiet firmness in James's voice, but he recovered quickly, smirking at his friend. Whatever, dude. Just keep her from kicking my seat, yeah? Amanda watched the exchange with growing satisfaction. She'd grown up in boardrooms and country clubs, taught from an early age to recognize who belonged and who didn't. Her father, a banking magnate, had drilled into her the importance of maintaining standards, of never letting yourself be dragged down by people who couldn't keep up. James, with his scuffed boots and his daughter's cheap backpack, represented everything her world had taught her to avoid. She returned to her tablet, but her attention kept drifting back to James. He was helping Lily open a juice box now, his large hands moving with surprising gentleness. It irritated Amanda in a way she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was how unbothered he seemed, how he absorbed every jab without flinching, without trying to justify himself. A businessman in a three-piece suit, probably in his late 50s, decided to escalate things. William was his name, a corporate executive who collected expensive watches and even more expensive grudges. He leaned across the aisle, his voice smooth but cutting. "Must be nice," William said, gesturing at James with his scotch glass, "playing dress-up in premium class. What did you do? Win the lottery? Or are you one of those people who maxes out credit cards for Instagram photos?" The cabin went silent. Even the flight attendants paused in their pre-flight checks. Lily's head snapped up from her notebook, her eyes wide and confused, but James didn't react. He simply finished opening the juice box and handed it to his daughter. "We're here to fly," James said quietly, his voice carrying an edge that made William's smirk falter. "Not to entertain you." William leaned back, muttering something about class and manners, but the sharpness had left his voice. Amanda felt a strange flutter of unease. Most people would have exploded by now, would have gotten defensive or tried to prove themselves, but James just sat there, solid and unmoved, like he had nothing to prove to anyone. "Daddy, look," Lily said, holding up her notebook. "It's an A10 Thunderbolt. You helped design these, remember?" James smiled, just a slight curve of his lips. "Good memory, sweetheart. You got the gun placement perfect." Amanda rolled her eyes. The kid was cute in that generic childhood way, but this whole scene was absurd. A single father parading through premium class, taking up space meant for people who'd actually earned it. People like her who'd clawed their way to the top through intelligence and ruthlessness. She leaned toward Patricia again. "If he knows so much about planes, maybe he should have booked a seat in cargo." The plane began taxiing down the runway at LAX, the California sun beating against the windows. Flight 782 to Paris was scheduled for 11 hours, and Amanda had already decided it would be 11 hours too long. She had presentations to prepare, deals to close, an empire to maintain. She didn't have time for distractions, especially not the kind that came with light-up shoes and fighter jet doodles. As the engines roared and the plane lifted into the sky, Amanda caught one more glimpse of James. He was pointing out the window to Lily, explaining something about lift and drag, his voice too low to hear over the engine noise. The little girl nodded solemnly, her pencil already moving across a fresh page in her notebook. For just a moment, something flickered in Amanda's chest. A memory, maybe, of her own father, explaining stock markets and hostile takeovers while she sat in his office, young and eager to please. But she pushed it away, buried it under years of carefully constructed walls. That was different. Her father had been teaching her to be powerful. This man was just killing time. The seatbelt sign dimmed, and the cabin settled into the rhythm of a long flight. Amanda pulled up her emails, determined to ignore James Holland and his daughter for the rest of the journey. She had no idea that in a few short hours, everything she thought she knew about strength and worth would be shattered 30,000 feet above the ocean. The first hour passed with relative quiet, though the tension in the cabin never fully dissipated. Flight attendant Grace Bennett moved through the aisles with practiced efficiency, her smile warm, but her eyes tired. She'd been flying for 12 years and had seen every type of passenger imaginable. But something about the way people were treating James bothered her in a way she couldn't quite articulate. When she reached his row, Grace crouched down to Lily's level. "That's an amazing drawing," she said, gesturing at the notebook. "You really like planes, huh?" Lily beamed, her whole face lighting up. "My daddy used to fly them. He says the F-16 is the most fun, but the F-22 is the most powerful." Grace's eyebrows rose slightly. She glanced at James, who had already returned to his book, his expression neutral. "Your daddy sounds like he knows his stuff." "He knows everything about planes," Lily said proudly. "He can fly any of them." Amanda, overhearing the conversation, couldn't help herself. "Sure he can," she muttered to Patricia. "And I'm secretly an astronaut." Patricia giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. Maybe he watched Top Gun one too many times. Ryan, the tech entrepreneur, decided to join in again. He leaned over the aisle, his voice loud and mocking. "Hey, kid, maybe your dad can draw you a plane that actually works. That one looks like it's about to crash." His friend burst out laughing, slapping his armrest. A few other passengers chuckled, their eyes darting between Ryan and James, waiting for a reaction. Lily's face crumpled, her confidence evaporating. Her fingers tightened around her pencil, and her eyes started to glisten with tears. But before she could speak, James closed his book, slowly, deliberately. He looked at Ryan with those same steady eyes, and the cabin suddenly felt very small. "You done?" James asked. Just 2 words, but they carried the weight of something dangerous. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. The laughter died. He turned back to his drink, suddenly very interested in the ice cubes. Amanda felt her stomach twist. She'd watched James take hit after hit without flinching, but that look, that quiet, controlled intensity, made her realize she might have seriously misjudged this man. She busied herself with her tablet, suddenly uncomfortable. Michelle, a lifestyle influencer with 1 million followers and a carefully curated Instagram feed, decided it was her turn to pile on. She twisted in her seat, her cashmere sweater perfectly arranged, her phone already in her hand. I'm just saying," Michelle announced to no one in particular, her voice bright and venomous. "It's kind of inconsiderate to bring a child into this section. Some of us paid a lot of money for peace and quiet. It's all about being respectful of other people's space, you know." She glanced around for approval, her influencer smile fixed in place. Several passengers nodded, and Michelle's smile widened. She was about to add more when James spoke. "She hasn't made a sound in 45 minutes, he said, not even looking at Michelle. "Unless you're complaining about the sound of her pencil on paper." Michelle's smile froze. She fumbled with her phone, suddenly very busy scrolling through comments on her latest post. The cabin fell into an awkward silence. An hour into the flight, the beverage service began. Grace and another flight attendant moved through the cabin with,